The administrative weapon. The morning of November 9th arrived with a brittle clarity, frost etching intricate patterns on Dr. Harrison's windows. James stood in the parlor, watching the sun climb above Medicine Hat's scattered buildings, casting long shadows across streets still empty of traffic. 6 days until foreclosure. One administrative review that could void everything they'd fought for. Behind him, Eleanor moved quietly through the house, checking on Thomas in the guest room where he'd finally fallen into exhausted sleep near dawn. Sarah sat at the dining table, cleaning her rifle with mechanical precision, each motion reflecting the careful discipline of someone who'd learned that survival depended on preparation. Daniel had taken first watch from the front window, his posture alert despite the long night. "Coffee's ready," Mrs. Brennan announced softly from the kitchen doorway, her practical nature asserting itself even in crisis. "And I've porridge on the stove. You'll need your strength for what's ahead." James turned from the window, grateful for her steady presence. "Thank you. Has Dr. Harrison come down yet?" "In his study, writing letters." She set the coffee pot on the sideboard with a gentle thunk. Said something about calling in favors from Regina, the territorial capital. James felt a flicker of hope. If Harrison had connections there, people who might pressure the land office to reject the consortium's spurious challenge, it could make the difference between survival and ruin. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her face drawn but composed. "Thomas is still sleeping. I don't want to wake him yet. Let him have a few more hours of peace." "How is he?" Sarah asked without looking up from her rifle. "Quiet. Too quiet." Eleanor crossed to the coffee pot, poured herself a cup with hands that trembled slightly. "He used to chatter constantly. Now he barely speaks unless spoken to." James moved to her side, placed a hand on her shoulder. "When this is over—" "When is it over?" Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. "We solve one problem and another appears. The bank debt, Blackwood's men, the consortium's legal attacks, the fire, now this administrative review. When does it actually end, James?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Daniel shifted uncomfortably at the window. Sarah's hands stilled on the rifle. James searched for words that weren't platitudes, weren't false promises. "When we make it end," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a hardness that made James's chest ache, "when we stop reacting and start dictating terms." Eleanor turned to face her daughter. "And how do we do that, Sarah? We're homesteaders. They're wealthy men with lawyers and connections and they're afraid?" Sarah interrupted. "Why else would they keep attacking? If they were truly confident in their position, they'd wait for the legal process to play out. But they're not waiting. They're burning banks and filing emergency challenges because they know their position is weak." James studied his daughter, seeing again the transformation that had occurred over these brutal months. The girl who'd left Ontario had become someone he barely recognized. Harder, sharper, more dangerous. And yet her logic was sound. "She's right," Daniel said from the window. "My father always said desperate men make mistakes. The consortium's getting desperate. Or more dangerous," Eleanor countered. But James heard the shift in her tone, from despair toward calculation. His wife was a fighter, always had been. She just needed to see a path forward. Dr. Harrison emerged from his study carrying several sealed envelopes. "I've written to 3 territorial officials in Regina, men I served with during the Riel Rebellion, men who owe me favors. They'll make inquiries about this administrative review, apply pressure where it counts." He set the letters on the sideboard. "But it will take time. Days, perhaps a week before we hear back." "We don't have a week," James said. 6 days until foreclosure." Which brings us to today's immediate problem. Harrison poured himself coffee, his movements deliberate. "The investor meeting at 3 o'clock. We need to secure that bridge loan regardless of the land office challenge. If we can pay off the bank debt, we eliminate one threat even while fighting another." Sarah finally looked up from her rifle. "Will they still loan money if our claim is under review?" "That's what we need to determine." Harrison sipped his coffee. "Henry Walsh, Margaret Fletcher, and the others are cautious, but they're also stubborn. They don't like seeing Toronto money push frontier families around. The question is whether their principles outweigh their prudence." A knock at the front door made everyone freeze. Daniel's hand moved to his revolver. Sarah lifted her rifle. James crossed to the window, peered through the curtain. "It's Edmund Whitmore," he said, surprised. The lawyer stood on the porch, hatless despite the cold, his expression grave. James opened the door. Whitmore stepped inside quickly, glancing over his shoulder before speaking. "I came as soon as I heard. The consortium's challenge. It's worse than you think." They gathered in the parlor, Whitmore refusing coffee, too agitated to sit. "I spent the night reviewing territorial land regulations. The administrative review they've triggered can take months to resolve. During that time, all transactions involving the property are suspended. You can't sell, can't mortgage, can't even legally extract more ore." "But we've already extracted ore," Sarah protested. "It's sitting in the bank vault." "Which is why they waited until now to file the challenge," Whitmore explained. "They wanted you to invest time and resources in extraction before springing this trap. Now your ore is locked up. You can't refine it without accessing your claim, and you can't access your claim during the review." James felt the walls closing in. "So even if we secure the bridge loan, we can't use it because we can't legally process the ore?" "Exactly," Whitmore began pacing. "They've created a perfect catch-22. You need money to pay the bank, but you can't access the assets that would generate that money." "There has to be a way around this," Daniel said. "Some legal loophole." Whitmore stopped pacing, his expression conflicted. "There is one possibility. If you could prove the administrative challenge is frivolous, filed in bad faith with no legitimate grounds, the land office might dismiss it immediately rather than conducting a full review." "How do we prove that?" Eleanor asked. "We'd need evidence that the consortium orchestrated the challenge specifically to obstruct your operations. Documentation of their involvement, testimony from witnesses, proof of coordination between the consortium and whoever filed the complaint." James exchanged glances with Sarah. "The captured men from Hartwell's organization. Would their testimony help?" "Possibly, but they're in custody in Fort Walsh, and bringing them here would take weeks. We need something more immediate." Sarah stood abruptly. "The consortium agent who's been watching us, the one who saluted at the fire, he's still out there, still conducting surveillance. What if we could catch him in the act of coordinating with land office officials?" "That would be nearly impossible," Whitmore said. "He'll be careful not to be seen making such contacts." "Unless we give him a reason to be careless," Sarah continued, her voice gaining certainty. "What if we let him think we're about to do something that requires immediate intervention, something that would force him to contact his handlers quickly without proper caution?" James saw where she was going. "You want to set a trap." "Not a trap, a test." Sarah turned to Whitmore. "If we announce we're moving the ore out of the bank vault today, taking it to a refinery despite the administrative hold, would that force the consortium to act?" "It would be illegal," Whitmore warned. "Violating the administrative suspension could void your claim entirely." "But what if we don't actually move it?" Daniel said, catching Sarah's thread. "What if we just make it look like we're planning to? The consortium doesn't know we understand the legal restrictions. They might assume we're ignorant of the rules and act to stop us." Harrison set down his coffee cup with a thoughtful expression. "You're proposing we stage a false attempt to access the ore, forcing the consortium to reveal their hand?" "More than that," Sarah said. "We make it public. We go to the bank with a wagon, make a show of demanding our property. The consortium agent will see it. If he's coordinating with land office officials, he'll need to contact them immediately to ensure the bank refuses our request. And if we're watching carefully, we might catch them communicating," James finished. "See who the agent contacts, establish the connection between the consortium and the administrative challenge." Whitmore considered this, his lawyer's mind working through implications. "It's risky. If you're caught actually attempting to remove the ore, you'll be in legal jeopardy. And if the consortium realizes it's a trap, they might simply do nothing." "But if it works," Eleanor said slowly, "we'd have proof of bad faith filing. The land office would have to dismiss the challenge. And we'd be free to use the ore as collateral for the bridge loan," Harrison added. "Pay off the bank, secure our position." James looked around the room at the faces of his family and allies. 6 days until foreclosure. One administrative review standing between them and survival. and a desperate gambit that might either save them or destroy everything. "We need to be smart about this," he said. "If we're going to stage this confrontation, we need witnesses. People who can testify that we acted in good faith, that we genuinely believed we had the right to access our property." "I'll be there," Harrison said immediately, "as will several of my colleagues from the Medical Association. We'll make it look like a community event, supporting local homesteaders against banking overreach. And I'll position myself where I can watch for the consortium agent," Daniel offered. "Track where he goes, who he contacts." Sarah nodded. "I'll go with Father to the bank. Make it look like a family decision, not a calculated move." Eleanor's hands clenched around her coffee cup. "And Thomas and I? Stay here," James said gently. "Keep him safe. If this goes wrong, we'll all face the consequences together," Eleanor interrupted. "But I agree Thomas should stay here. He's seen enough violence." Whitmore gathered his hat and coat. "I'll prepare the legal documentation, a formal request for access to property stored in the bank vault, citing your ownership rights and the need to fulfill financial obligations. It will give you legal cover for the attempt, even if it fails." "When should we do this?" Sarah asked. "This afternoon," Harrison said, "before the investor meeting. If we can prove the administrative challenge is fraudulent by 3 o'clock, we'll be in a much stronger position to secure the bridge loan." James checked his pocket watch. 9:30 in the morning. 5.5 hours to prepare a gambit that could either save his family or destroy them completely. After Whitmore left, the family spent the morning making preparations. Harrison sent messages to colleagues, arranging for them to gather at the bank at 2 o'clock. Daniel scouted positions around the bank building, identifying vantage points where he could observe without being seen. Sarah checked her rifle, then her revolver, moving with the methodical calm of someone preparing for battle. James found Eleanor in the guest room, sitting beside Thomas's bed. Their son was awake now, playing quietly with wooden blocks Mrs. Brennan had found for him. "Papa," Thomas said when he noticed James in the doorway, "are we going home soon?" The question pierced James's heart. Home. The soddy on their claim, the land they'd broken and planted, the life they'd tried to build, all of it hanging by a thread. "Soon," he promised, knowing it might be a lie. "We just have some business to finish in town first." Thomas nodded solemnly, accepting this as he'd learned to accept all the upheavals of recent months. James wondered what scars this constant uncertainty was carving into his son's spirit. Eleanor followed James into the hallway, closing the door softly. "Tell me honestly, what are our chances?" James considered lying, offering false reassurance. But Eleanor deserved truth. "If this works, if we can prove the consortium's bad faith and secure the bridge loan, we might actually win. But if it fails, we lose everything." "Yes." Eleanor studied his face, her expression unreadable. Then she took his hand, squeezed it firmly. "Then we'd better make sure it works." At 1:30, they gathered in Harrison's parlor for final preparations. Sarah wore her riding clothes, practical and unremarkable. James had borrowed one of Harrison's better coats, wanting to look respectable for the confrontation ahead. Daniel had positioned himself across from the bank an hour earlier, watching for the consortium agent. Harrison handed James a leather folder. "Whitmore's documentation. Everything is in order. Your property deed, the bank receipt for the ore, the formal request for access. You have every legal right to attempt this." "Even though we know it will be denied," Sarah said. "Even so, the attempt is what matters. The public nature of it, the witnesses, the consortium's response." Mrs. Brennan appeared with Thomas, who looked confused by the formal atmosphere. Eleanor knelt beside him. "You're going to stay here with Mrs. Brennan while Papa and Sarah and Dr. Harrison go to the bank. We'll be back soon." "Is it dangerous?" Thomas asked, his young voice carrying a weariness that no child should possess. Eleanor hesitated, then chose honesty. "It might be, but we're being careful." Thomas hugged her fiercely. "Come back safe." "We will," Eleanor promised, though James saw the fear in her eyes. They left at 2 o'clock, walking down Medicine Hat's main street with Harrison and 3 of his medical colleagues. Other townspeople joined them. Homesteaders who'd heard about the consortium's administrative challenge, merchants who resented Toronto money's interference in local affairs. By the time they reached the bank, nearly 20 people had gathered, transforming James's private confrontation into a public demonstration. The consortium agent was there, leaning against the telegraph office wall across the street. He watched the growing crowd with obvious concern, his casual pose failing to hide his tension. James mounted the bank's front steps, Sarah beside him. The crowd quieted. He raised his voice to Carrie. "I'm here to claim property that belongs to me, or extracted from my mining claim, stored in this bank's vault for safekeeping. I have documentation proving ownership and urgent need to access these assets." The bank's front door opened. Cornelius Webb stepped out, his face pale and strained. "Mr. Mackenzie, you know I can't allow that. The administrative review is a fraudulent filing designed to obstruct legitimate business," James interrupted, projecting his voice for the crowd. "I'm a homesteader trying to save my family's land. That ore represents months of dangerous work. I have every right to use it as I see fit." Webb's eyes darted to the consortium agent across the street, then back to James. "I have my orders from the Territorial Land Office. Until the review is complete, all transactions are suspended." "Orders received when?" Sarah asked sharply. "Yesterday evening, perhaps? Shortly after the challenge was filed?" Webb's silence was answer enough. The crowd murmured. Harrison stepped forward. "Mr. Webb, this administrative challenge was filed by parties unknown, with no stated grounds for complaint. Surely you can see it's being used as a weapon against this family. I can't make exceptions based on speculation," Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The law is clear." James watched the consortium agent push away from the telegraph office wall, moving quickly down the street toward the land office. Daniel emerged from his position, following at a careful distance. The trap was sprung. Now they had to see if it would catch anything. "I'm formally requesting access to my property," James said, handing Webb the leather folder. "This documentation proves my ownership and right to access. I'm prepared to wait while you review it." Webb took the folder with reluctant hands, knowing he was trapped between the consortium's demands and the watching crowd. I'll need to consult with my superiors." "Of course," James said pleasantly. "We'll wait." The standoff lasted nearly an hour. Webb disappeared into the bank, emerging periodically to announce he was still awaiting guidance. The crowd grew larger, more vocal. Homesteaders shared stories of the consortium's predatory practices. Merchants discussed Toronto money's impact on local commerce. What had begun as James's personal confrontation was becoming something larger, a community's collective resistance to outside control. Daniel returned at 3:00, his expression triumphant. He caught James's eye, nodded once. The signal was clear. He'd seen something useful. Webb finally emerged at 3:15, his face drawn. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mackenzie. I cannot authorize access to the vault contents until the administrative review is complete. It would be improper." James accepted this with apparent disappointment, though his heart was racing. "I understand you're in a difficult position, Mr. Webb. I'll pursue this through proper legal channels." He turned to the crowd. "Thank you all for your support. This fight isn't over. The consortium thinks they can use bureaucracy as a weapon, but we won't surrender our rights without a fight." The crowd dispersed slowly, people lingering to offer encouragement. James, Sarah, and Harrison walked back toward the doctor's house, Daniel falling into step beside them once they were away from observers. "I followed him to the land office," Daniel reported quietly. He went straight to Silas Pemberton's office, the territorial surveyor who supposedly filed the administrative challenge. They were in there for 10 minutes. When the agent left, Pemberton looked worried. "Did anyone else see them together?" Harrison asked. "I made sure of it. I arranged for Johann Schmidt to be passing by at the right moment. He's willing to testify to what he saw." Sarah smiled grimly. "So we have a consortium agent meeting with the official who filed the challenge immediately after we announced our intention to access the ore. That's coordination." "It's a start," Harrison agreed. "But we need more. We need to prove Pemberton filed the challenge at the consortium's direction, not on his own initiative." "Whitmore can handle that," James said. "He'll file a motion to dismiss the challenge, citing bad faith. The evidence we've gathered today will support it." They reached Harrison's house to find Eleanor waiting anxiously on the porch. "Did it work?" "It worked," James confirmed. pulling her into an embrace. We have evidence of coordination. Not conclusive yet, but enough to build on. Inside, they found Thomas building an elaborate structure from his wooden blocks, Mrs. Brennan watching over him with patient attention. The normalcy of the scene, a child playing, a housekeeper smiling, felt surreal after the tension of the afternoon. At 3:30, Henry Walsh arrived for the investor meeting, followed shortly by Margaret Fletcher. Dr. Harrison led them to his study, where the group gathered around his desk. Walsh got straight to business. We heard about your confrontation at the bank. Half the town's talking about it. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, James admitted. But we had to do something. The consortium's administrative challenge is designed to trap us, prevent us from accessing our assets while the foreclosure deadline approaches. We understand that, Margaret Fletcher said. The question is whether we're willing to loan money against property that's currently under administrative review. If the challenge succeeds, if your claim is voided, we'd lose everything we've invested. The challenge won't succeed, Sarah said firmly. It's fraudulent, filed in bad faith. We have evidence of consortium coordination with the land office official who filed it. Walsh leaned back in his chair. Evidence you gathered this afternoon? Forgive me, Miss Mackenzie, but that's not exactly conclusive. It's enough to file a motion to dismiss, Harrison said. Edmund Whitmore is preparing the paperwork now. If the motion succeeds, and I believe it will, the administrative hold will be lifted within days. And if it doesn't? Fletcher asked. Then we're ruined, Eleanor said bluntly, and you lose your investment. We're not going to pretend otherwise. This is a risk, but it's a risk against Toronto money that's killed other families for their claims. The question is whether you're willing to stand up to that, or whether you'll let them win through legal manipulation. The room fell silent. Walsh and Fletcher exchanged long looks, a conversation passing between them without words. Finally, Walsh spoke. The amount you need is $280 to pay off the banknote. We're prepared to offer $300, enough to cover the debt and provide a small cushion for legal expenses. The loan would be secured against your homestead and mining claim, due in full within 90 days with 10% interest. 90 days, James repeated. That gives us time to refine the ore and repay you from the proceeds. If the administrative challenge is dismissed, Fletcher added, if it's not, if the hold remains in place past your 90-day deadline, we'd be forced to foreclose. We understand, James said, and we accept your terms. Walsh pulled documents from his leather case. These are the loan papers. Dr. Harrison has agreed to witness the signing. Once you've reviewed and signed, I'll deliver payment to the bank tomorrow morning. James read through the documents carefully, Eleanor looking over his shoulder. The terms were fair, harsh given the circumstances, but not exploitative. Walsh and Fletcher were taking a genuine risk, betting on the Mackenzie family's ability to navigate the consortium's legal warfare. He signed. Eleanor signed. Sarah witnessed. The deal was done. After Walsh and Fletcher left, the family gathered in Harrison's parlor. The winter sun was setting, painting the walls with amber light. Thomas sat between his parents, finally allowed to join the adults now that the immediate crisis had passed. So we can pay the bank, Eleanor said. That's one threat eliminated. But the administrative challenge remains, Sarah added. Until that's dismissed, we still can't access the ore. Whitmore will file the motion tomorrow, Harrison said. With the evidence we gathered today and Johann Schmidt's testimony, we have a solid case for bad faith filing. How long until we know if it worked? Daniel asked. Days, possibly a week. The land office will need to review the motion, investigate the claims, make a ruling. James felt the weight of it all pressing down. They'd survived another day, secured another temporary reprieve. But the consortium remained out there, planning their next move. The administrative challenge was just one weapon in an arsenal that seemed bottomless. There's something else, Eleanor said quietly. Thomas Garrett, the Pinkerton detective. He's supposed to arrive soon, isn't he? Any day now, James confirmed. He's carrying evidence from Blackburn's investigation. If he can connect the consortium's leadership to the murders, to the crimes they've committed, then we might finally see justice, Sarah finished. Thomas looked up at his parents. Will the bad men go away then? Will we be safe? James met Eleanor's eyes over their son's head. He wanted to promise safety, to assure Thomas that everything would be fine. But they'd promised that before, and it had been a lie. "We'll keep fighting," he said instead, "as long as we need to, and we'll do it together." Outside, darkness settled over Medicine Hat. Somewhere in the town, the consortium agent was reporting the day's events to his masters. Somewhere to the north, Thomas Garrett rode closer with evidence that could change everything. And in Harrison's house, a family prepared for whatever came next, knowing that 6 days remained until their original deadline, that their bridge loan had bought them time but not security, and that the consortium's next move was already being planned in rooms they couldn't see, by men whose faces they'd never glimpsed. The administrative weapon had been deployed. Now they had to dismantle it before it destroyed them completely.
Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures. Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures.